We're going to be taking a deep journalistic look at a pretty heavy investigation into the hidden realities of the pornography industry. The source material we're unpacking today goes way beyond the usual surface-level debates of personal morality and dives straight into the systemic issues that lie just out of frame. It's a serious topic for sure, but it is absolutely crucial to understand if we want a full picture of how this global industry actually operates.
Okay, let's dive right into this. For a long time, the dominant cultural narrative has kind of just been that pornography is a matter of free speech. The argument generally goes that it might be obscene to some people, but ultimately, it's just consenting adults performing in private. It's framed as a victimless crime. But the source material we are examining today sets out to explicitly challenge that very notion, asking if anyone is actually getting hurt behind closed doors.
Section 1, Psychological Distortions and Violence. Let's take a look at the psychological effects tied to this industry. So, the investigation argues that pornography doesn't just present a harmless fantasy, it actively normalizes aggression. Based on a study reviewing some of the most popular videos out there, a staggering 88% contained violence against women. To put that into perspective, that's almost 9 out of every 10 videos, highlighting an overwhelming prevalence of aggression embedded in everyday mainstream content. And honestly, here's where the psychological impact really deepens. That same study found that in 95% of those violent videos, the women responded in a neutral or even positive manner. The creator argues this creates a highly dangerous subliminal effect, basically wiring the viewer's brain to link arousal directly with violence and degradation. So, what does this all mean in the real world? Well, the source lists a cascade of devastating outcomes. We're talking about highly unrealistic expectations, the destruction of marriages, and really alarmingly, sexual assault. In fact, the Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force identified 46 published studies suggesting that prolonged exposure leaves an individual at a significantly higher risk of committing a sexual offense or even seeking out prostitution.
Moving on to part 2, the illusion of consent. Let's shift our focus from the viewer directly to the reality of the performers.
This investigation aggressively debunks the myth that this industry is populated entirely by freely consenting, well-paid actors. Harrowing testimonials from people who actually worked in the business paint a completely different picture. They share statements like, "It was often painful." Another one reads, "I was pressured to do things I didn't feel comfortable doing." The source shows that even for folks who initially signed up freely, getting gigs often meant they had to submit to highly abusive scenarios. And this brilliantly illustrates the point the creator is making. I often felt degraded or abused. The reality is, very few performers get those nice romantic roles. Many are left being dominated on camera in ways they absolutely never agreed to. And then there is this final, horrifying quote. "What you were watching on that video was me being raped." It really highlights the terrifying reality that the violence you see isn't always acting. Sometimes it is actual, documented abuse recorded for entertainment.
On the surface, the appearance is usually one of smiling, freely consenting adults getting paid to perform, right? But the hidden reality is frequently built on fraud, force, and coercion. The investigation outlines scenarios where women answer calls for modeling jobs, only to be secretly drugged and assaulted. For immigrant models, their documentation might literally be withheld, or they might be blackmailed with the very footage of their assault just to force compliance. In many cases, pimps force prostitutes to perform on camera to double their profits. What looks like consent is often compliance born out of sheer fear. The scale of this overlap is just deeply concerning. One specific study cited in the source found that approximately 1/3 of prostitution victims at a single recovery house had been used in the production of pornography. 1/3. Now, because this is an illicit and secretive underbelly, exact global numbers are impossible to verify. But this statistic alone points to a massive, systemic problem. Which brings us to part 3, fueling human trafficking. This systemic overlap brings us to the absolute darkest layer of the investigation. This builds into a horrific cycle of exploitation. The source's logic is pretty straightforward here. You have a multi-billion-dollar industry producing content with essentially zero overhead, because the performers are often trafficked or coerced. That massive revenue creates an irresistible incentive for human traffickers to supply the actors. The vast financial demand actively increases the illicit supply. And the investigation issues a severe warning about where this cycle inevitably leads, stating, whenever there is a demand for trafficked young adult women, The demand for trafficked children is soon to follow. It is a natural, horrific escalation of supply and demand that the industry structure encourages.
Let that number sink in for a second. 182 million. Based on 2013 data cited in the source material, that represents the estimated number of Google searches for teen porn in a single year. That's roughly 500,000 searches every single day. This immense demand directly incentivizes traffickers to groom and exploit younger and younger individuals to feed this ever-growing industry.
Finally, part 4, a matter of justice. Let's look at the overarching thesis of the source material.
This really brings us to the core of the investigation, a complete reframing of the conversation. The old view treats pornography as a question of decency, personal conduct, and free speech, essentially a victimless private act. But the reality presented here is that it is a systemic act that actively promotes the abuse of women and directly incentivizes human trafficking. This transforms the whole issue from a debate about personal morality into an urgent, undeniable human rights crisis regarding exploitation.
The investigation sums this up with a really powerful concluding thesis. It has nothing to do with personal conduct or free speech. This is an issue of justice. The case is made plain and simple that every click, regardless of the viewer's personal intention, feeds into an industry that abuses, coerces, and enslaves people for profit. Which leaves us with this final, profound question inspired by the source material. We know the screen is presenting a fantasy, right? But what is the reality for the human being on the other side? It's a question that demands some real reflection, fundamentally challenging us to look way beyond the surface of what we consume. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep questioning the realities behind the media we engage with every day.